massive warning that this video will contain all kinds of spoilers for Suzanne Collins' prequel book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So there's your disclaimer, so you can step away from the video now if you have not read the book. Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice, ready to finally, after such a long time of waiting, discuss Suzanne Collins' prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Oh my goodness, it was really late at night when I started writing the script and pouring out all my thoughts, because obviously I had stayed up pretty late the night before trying to read the book and finishing it throughout the next day, so needless to say, this might be a little bit scatterbrained. Now, this is not a big deep dive discussion of the book. It's more or less my first response to certain elements and my first thoughts, so barely even a review. Before I get into things, I do want to let you all know that I will be having a big 2-year anniversary on YouTube live stream either June 5th, 7th, or 8th in the evening. Not sure which day yet, depends on certain things with one of my jobs. But be looking in the community tab for more details as they come. Until then, I do live stream every Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so tune into those if you can. One last quick note before I dive into my review, if you will. I heavily regret not buying 2 of this book, because as I was reading, I realized that I really wanted to be highlighting and writing notes in the corner, especially for the sake of a video like this, so I could go back and easily find the spots that stood out to me. But I guess I could have still highlighted and written notes and then just bought a paperback later. Or no, I'd rather make the notes in the paperback. But my point is, I probably will miss a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about just because there's so much there, and it's the biggest of all the Hunger Games books. It was over 500 pages, and the other ones maxed out, I think, at maybe a little over 400, not sure. Okay, first of all, I loved this book. I was intrigued, I was invested, I love all the little nuances and connections to the trilogy, save for one, because they didn't feel forced or weird or out of place, but actually added to the lore quite seamlessly and nicely and made perfect sense. And finally, I love that I was challenged to think. More on that later. So first I want to discuss some of the little details that I either enjoyed or didn't enjoy, just little nuances here and there that I thought made a big difference one way or another. The continuation of themed names, especially from Greek and Roman mythology, was a nice touch and made sense considering the country is called Panem. The connections in this book to capital names that we will see later on in the trilogy were also quite nice. Given how the structure of the capital is, it would stand to reason that those that come up in the trilogy would probably have a long-standing history on good terms with the capital. I also personally really liked finding out about the man who created the games, Dean Highbottom, except he didn't create them, or he didn't want it, realistically. Crassus Snow, Coriolanus Snow's father, took the idea from him and ran with it to Dr. Gall, so it makes sense why Highbottom was a little bit distrusting of Snow, especially considering how much like his father he is, although no, you shouldn't punish the son for the sins of the father. I know. And also why he ended up medicating himself so heavily. Just one night of reckless drinking with whom he thought was his best friend led to what would become 75 years of horror, 76 if you count after the third quarter quell. There was one small detail that I wasn't a huge fan of, and that was the ancestor to Caesar, FLICKERMAN. Now don't get me wrong, I did like Lucky FLICKERMAN, he was a lot like Caesar, very clearly, but I felt that it was too far of a stretch that the FLICKERMAN line was just going to be all Hunger Games hosts. I mean, I guess it's possible, but me personally, that was the one thing that felt like little bit too far of a stretch. Now, there are tons of bigger things to talk about and respond to in this book, and I know I'm not going to get to all of them either because I forgot, because this was only my first reading of the book, or because I haven't reread the trilogy since last November, so I might be forgetting some connections. But either way, the list is pretty long, so I need to just jump in. TIGRIS. At first, I thought she was a really stupid plug-in until I started to see this deep bond with her cousin, Coriolanus Snow. Oh my gosh, that's just crazy. And it made me start to question more and more some of the stuff that happens in the third book of the trilogy, and thus making me have less and less respect for Corio. We all knew where Snow would end up in this book, as power hungry, sympathizing with the Capitol, thinking that, yes, they needed to have complete control, and thus you have to ask, how far low, morally speaking, did he sink to, after letting his cousin, his beloved cousin who took care of him in every way possible, be a stylist in the games and then suddenly just discard her? Furthermore, that explains why Katniss and Mockingjay has a little bit of a hard time making out some of Tigris's intentions with some of her facial expressions, especially when she tells Tigris she's gonna kill Snow. I mean, she's a Snow. Tigris Snow. That's... wow. And the character of Tigris, pre-stylist, was so well thought out anyway. Obviously, she matched in stature. She was tall and skinny, which we see her become in the 3rd book. But also those little hints to the fact that she likes to sneak out pieces of raw meat, which is something we see highlighted again when we are introduced to her in the 3rd book. Just a very well thought out character, and it really makes you dislike Snow even more, because you just wonder how they got to that point, and you feel really, really bad for her. This book was not trying to get you to sympathize with Coriolanus, but rather to understand how that kind of thing can happen, one choice at a time. Unlike with Tigris, his borderline poverty didn't shape him to be this good-natured person who wanted to help people, but instead made him feel like the universe was out to get him and his good name. The fact that he thought so highly of himself and felt it was the Capitol's duty to take complete control, I knew he and Lucy Gray were not going to remain a thing. Speaking of Lucy Gray, oh, what an entrance to a character. What a character. I so appreciate that she didn't end up being a Katniss knockoff, by the way. She, however, provides most of the understanding as to why Snow hates Katniss so stinking much, and why he picked up on what a formidable foe and force for the rebellion she would end up being, and thus not pay attention to Coin, who was undermining the whole thing and is essentially him. Because at times I remember thinking, come on, Snow was smarter than that. Why was he not looking at Coin? I mean, yes, he had to be looking at Katniss. She was a formidable force, but why wasn't he looking at Coin? Now we know why. We know who she reminded him of. Lucy Gray was responsible for all of those poignant and rebellious songs, and while that should have seemed like a cheap writer's move, it made perfect sense. My heart broke for her the moment she started falling for Coriolanus. I mean, it was clearly a trap. Even if he didn't intend it to be a trap, he himself is a trap, but thankfully she got out. And we don't know if she lived or not, so it's very possible that she is an ancestor to Katniss Everdeen, on her father's side, of course. Or I could at least see one of the Covey being an ancestor to Katniss Everdeen. And by the way, don't scare me for pronunciations. All we have is the book. We don't know how to pronounce everything just yet. If it turns out that Lucy Gray is the ancestor to Katniss, then that means their bloodline has 2 victors. It also means Lucy Gray probably married an Everdeen, or somewhere down the line they married an Everdeen. I don't know, but possible theory video? I think so. So overall, Lucy Gray, very well done character, and is definitely going to be a favorite. The development of the games. This book brought tons of clarity to that. Beginning to implement betting and bringing in sponsors. The realization that they needed to look good and be appealing. So starting with interviews, which would probably lead to them getting stylists later on. And by the end of the book, suggesting that they need some sort of hope, both capital and district alike. Something for them to want to win. You know, the Victor's Village and a year of goods for their district. As future President Snow would say, a little bit of hope is effective. This just goes to show that, of course, this type of thing can't just happen overnight. They didn't just suddenly implement the games and now everyone's like, yay, sports things. No, not at all. The higher-ups had to numb the citizens of the capital. They clearly withheld certain bits of information from them as time went on, and what information they did give was twisted and probably inaccurate, you know, because that's what the media does, don't they? In this book, we see that the citizens of the capital, they're not very fond of these games, but are clearly too afraid to stand up against it either. Look at what they did to the body of the District 10 girl. They freaking dangled her corpse above a truck bed with the rest of the tributes tired and shackled in the middle of the funeral of Arachne. This was the first moment in the book following the throat slitting that I audibly gasped and almost dropped my book. I knew it was going to be dark. I knew it would be gory. I read The Hunger Games. Obviously, I knew that, but the fact that they were doing it in the capital, you can see how this was a fear tactic to get the capital to hate the districts even more. That's all they were trying to do, get them to hate the districts so that there was more of that divide rather than wanting to work together and seeing them as viable humans. A tactic that we know would later be used to just scare the districts, and they wouldn't really do it in the capital anymore once they got the capital to do what they wanted them to do. And we all know this had to be future President Snow's idea since he knew what kind of an impact it had on him. Naturally, it would have a grave impact, no pun intended, on the districts. Going back to that whole idea of what is a viable human, Dr. Gall. Oh, disgusting. Her view of humanity is the lowest of the low and completely inaccurate. However, there was one line she said that stuck with me because she was actually right. She mentions how, yeah, environments and circumstances can have an influence over a person, but ultimately it's the individual who makes the choice. She's right about that, actually. We see it today. People try to claim that their actions or the actions of others were because they grew up in a bad environment of some sort. And it's like, no, you made the choice. You knew it was wrong. It doesn't matter if you had a bad environment. We all have bad things happen to us. That doesn't justify making morally wrong decisions. I guess a grotesquely broken clock can be right once or twice, but other than that, she's absolutely despicable. The thing is, she uses this actually correct idea and somehow molds it to fit her agenda instead. And you just have to ask the entire time, if you believe all humans are at their core animalistic, then what gives you the right to have control over them? Aren't you human too? But that's what happens when you have the money and the power. That's also what happens when you give your money to a higher power to distribute equally, because you know that they're going to get power hungry and they're not actually going to distribute equally. Or they will, but it'll leave a nice large gap between the elite and the poor with no way to climb the rank. My point is, Dr. Gall is disgusting and she's an example of one huge extreme, but she was really good to read? I don't know how to say that without it sounding bad, but it was a really good character to read, even though she's horrible. Yeah. As alluded to in the beginning of this video, this book really makes you think if you're open to it. Sure, if you want, you can just skim through it and toss aside all the deeper meanings and decide it's just a decent book that adds some lore to the world and to Snow himself. I predict that many will probably latch onto these tiny things in the book that are definitely there, but then magnify them to the point where they overshadow the main message Suzanne Collins is trying to get across in this book. I also predict that's exactly what's going to happen with the film they're making. I would love to be proven wrong, but considering that one tiny change they made in the last film, yeah, you can bet they are going to shortcut all of the bigger messages in this book to fit their agenda. Now, we know that movies are just never going to be able to fully adapt a book perfectly. It's two completely different forms of media. I get that, but why am I talking about it so severely? Well, the thing is, the ideas in this book completely fly in the face of the agenda the mainstream media tries to promote and what virtue signaling celebrities try to promote. Be assured they're not going to like it and they're going to try and mold it into something that it's not. So you have to wonder how much input Suzanne Collins is going to get to have. I don't know. Again, if I'm proven wrong, awesome. I would love to be proven wrong. Because frankly, other than that one tiny change that really bothered me that I mentioned in a previous video that they did in the last film, they did the books a pretty decent justice, I thought. So hopefully they'll do the same for this one. I don't know. It's too soon to tell. I don't know. I'm fresh off this book. I have a lot of thoughts. Sticking with the theme that I'm trying to talk about in this section, which is the book forcing you to think, there is a conversation between Lucy Gray and Snow on pages 434 and 435, at least in my book, that I believe highlights exactly one of the main messages. Beginning with Coriolanus. I don't agree with everything the Capitol does, but I am Capitol, and on the whole, I think we're right about needing order. Lucy Gray. The Covey believe you're put on Earth to reduce the misery, not add to it. Do you think the Hunger Games are right? I'm not even sure why we do them, to be honest, but I do think people are forgetting the war too fast. What we did to each other, what we're capable of, districts and capital both. I know the capital must seem hard line out here, but we're just trying to keep things under control. Otherwise, there'd be chaos and people running around and killing each other like in the arena. That's what you think people would do? I do. Unless there's law and someone enforcing it, I think we might as well all be animals. Like it or not, the capital is the only thing keeping people safe. So they keep me safe. And what do I give up for that? Give up? Why nothing. The Covey did. Can't travel. Can't perform without their say-so. Can only sing certain types of songs. Fight getting round up, and you get shot like my daddy. Try to keep your family together, and you get your head broken like my mama. What if I think that price is too high to pay? Maybe my freedom's worth the risk. So your family were rebels after all. My family were Covey, first and last. Not district, not capital, not rebel, not peacekeeper, just us. And you're like us. You want to think for yourself. You push back. I know because of what you did for me in the games. Well, she had him there. If the Hunger Games were thought necessary by the capital, and if he had tried to thwart them, had he not refuted the capital's authority? Pushed back, as she said? Not like Sejanus in outright defiance, but in a quieter, subtler way of his own? Here's what I believe. If the capital wasn't in charge, we wouldn't be having this conversation because we'd have destroyed ourselves by now. People have been around a long time without the capital. I expect they'll be here a long time after. Not many of them. Panem used to be magnificent. Look at it now. Then after that they get interrupted, but I like to think the line that should have come after that was her saying, "But you don't know how Panem fell into disarray. You don't know. For all we know, the capital, as they started trying to rise up, probably erased history little by little and changed it to fit their agenda." That can be a danger of public schools. I promise I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I probably will homeschool my children. Why wouldn't I want them home all the time? Possible famous last words, I don't know. Obviously, I agree with Lucy Gray. She believes in individual thought. Snow believes in controlling that thought to fit what he thinks is right. What can I say? I'm a proud citizen of the United States of America. We're not perfect, no country is, but our founding fathers knew a thing or two about the delicate balance between minimal government and freedom and liberty. This list could go on forever, and like I said, I'm probably forgetting stuff anyway, but I'd be remiss if I didn't finish up with the main man himself, Coriolanus Snow. I'm surprised how much I enjoyed reading a narcissistic point of view, if you will. Now, I'm no psychologist, and I have no idea what type of narcissism he even exudes. It seemed like a mix of grandiose and covert, but it could have just as easily been malignant based on my limited point of view. I don't know. I mean, think about it. The fake charm, the woe is me, the excess need for validation, the entitlement, the use of power and money to exert control, which he does far more so later in his life, and how easily he discarded Lucy Gray, who he claimed to love, and even his own cousin. However, he seems to stay mostly calm in the face of criticism from what I can see, so perhaps one could go as far as to say psychopathy? But again, I don't know. I'm not trained in that area. He's scary, to be sure. He has the patterns, but that just shows how well written he was. Hot dang, Suzanne Collins. It actually was almost too much at times for me, like to the point where I felt physically ill as I continued reading. This is gonna sound weird, but personally, the one part that really had my stomach churning was his dissecting of the Song of Lucy Gray, the one Maud Ivory sings. He doesn't appreciate beauty, especially in artistic music. Everything is black and white to him, and thus he felt the song was stupid and lacked purpose. He doesn't understand the greater purpose to the human soul with poetry such as that. That really struck a bad chord, no pun intended, with me, so I guess it was fascinating to read, but that part was really difficult to get through. It was intense to be in the mind of someone who seemed to have the potential to change, almost potential for empathy, but in the end threw it all out for power and money. He almost did something right by being influenced by Lucy Gray, but let's be honest, he wasn't being influenced. She was too free of a spirit and he demanded control. Count the number of times he refers to Lucy Gray as belonging to him. Okay, there might be some cases, rarely, where that can sound romantic, but it certainly didn't with him. At least I didn't get that vibe. And look how quickly he turned on her. He only protected her because of his lust for power and control, and obviously he picked someone who was in the weakest position and thus easiest to overpower. He was charming and she fell for it, but thankfully she was able to see through it in the end and got away. At least we hope she did. One final note concerning Lucy Gray, I'm now wondering if the reason District 12, by the time we get to the trilogy, isn't as affected with strict rules and peacekeepers, you know, like District 11 is, has to do with a small soft spot he still has because of her. No, he didn't love her. He was obsessed and a control freak and felt that he had ownership over her in some way. But in his sick, twisted mind, he probably thought it was love, and thus he didn't want to hurt District 12 too bad, until he had to, at which point it was pretty easy for him. And finally, I thought that somehow this book was going to end with him being president at age 18, but when I saw there were only a few pages left, I was like, oh, I guess that's not happening. But any concerns about that evaporated when he talked about how he slyly poisoned Dean Highbottom. And that is how his image as a poisonous snake began. In conclusion, I thought this book lived up to my expectations and then some. The characters were so well done, and the lore was added on tastefully and not just caked on like a lot of authors try to do nowadays. Clearly, Suzanne wrote this because she had more to say, not because she wanted a cash grab or attention. Actually, given what she's saying in the book, I'm pretty sure that's the last thing she wants. But I'm not her, I just know that in an interview, she commented how this book came about because she felt that there were certain things she needed to say. You know, things that are kind of highlighted in the trilogy, but she's a lot clearer in this book. But she's clear without it being in your face. That's not an easy feat. That's really good. I hope that people truly take the time to think when they're reading this book and have their own individual thoughts instead of buying into whatever the media is going to try to overshadow it with so that you can buy into their agenda. You know, like they always do. But I'm getting into topics that are not the point of my channel or my videos, so case in point, this book is great. I loved it. I think you'll love it. 10 out of 10 would recommend, although I don't know if you should read the trilogy first, but I'm very excited to reread the trilogy with all of this in mind. Oh, it's going to be great. It's such a good book. I personally really, really loved it. Y'all, I hope you enjoyed this scatterbrained video, and I hope you enjoyed this book, and I know I'm looking forward to going through it again at some point with a highlighter and a pencil at hand. Let me know in the comment section below if you'd be interested in some theory or discussion videos concerning this book. I already have about 3 in mind that I think would be interesting. Too bad it's not November, you know, my typical Hunger Games month, but hey, you gotta do it when the ideas are fresh, right? Also, I just want to note that a lot of my Hunger Games video as of late have been getting comments from preteens, children really, saying how they completely understood the message of the trilogy. They completely understood all the complexities. This is not an insult, but no, you didn't. You can't. You probably understood some basic ideas from the books, and that's good. I encourage that. But read them again when you've doubled in age and are like in your 20s, and you'll see how much you definitely did not understand. It's not your fault you're 11 years old, but there are just certain things you won't grasp until you've had a lot more of life in you. Again, not an insult, but I just found it funny because I'm like, you're 11. No. But hey, I'm so glad you're reading and thinking. I encourage that. Continue doing that. If you enjoyed this video, then maybe consider looking at my other content and joining the geekdom by subscribing. Also, massive shout out and thank you to my patrons, some of which we will be prepping for our next monthly movie night in the coming few weeks. So go to patreon.com/thegeekapprentice if you'd be interested in that sort of thing and want to see how you can get involved. Also, I hadn't had a specific goal on Patreon for a while, but I recently added one where if the community on Patreon grows to 30 patrons, no matter the pledge, doesn't matter to me, then I will implement monthly game nights that are streams for patrons only. So just throwing that out there. But anyway, that is all for today. Thank you for watching.